Daughter called me on a Tuesday morning, and the way she said, "Dad," just that one word, I knew something was wrong. I was sitting on my sister's porch in Savannah, drinking coffee and watching the mockingbirds fight over the feeder, like they do every morning. I've been down there a week already, helping her sort through some things after her knee surgery. It was supposed to be a quiet trip. Nothing eventful. Just me and Loretta and bad daytime television and too much sweet tea. But then my daughter called. "Dad." Her voice was low, like she didn't want to be heard. "He's doing it again. He's asking about the deed." I set my coffee down on the railing. "Her name is Alicia. She's 34 years old, my only child, and she has her mother's eyes and her mother's stubbornness, and, thank God, her mother's ability to eventually see the truths about people, even when it takes longer than it should. Her husband's name is Gavin. I'm going to tell you about Gavin. When Alicia first brought him home, she was 29. He was 32. He worked in what he called financial consulting, which, the more I pressed him on it, turned out to mean he helped small businesses find investors, and sometimes those investors were himself, and sometimes those deals worked out, and sometimes those deals worked out, and sometimes they didn't, and he was very casual about the whole thing in a way I found unsettling. He was handsome, I'll give him that. Tall, well-dressed, good at making eye contact. He called me Sir the first 3 times we met, which I appreciated. He knew which fork to use at dinner. He laughed at the right moments. He did everything right. That's what made me uncomfortable. My late wife, Gloria, God rest her, she used to say that you could tell a person's character not by how they behaved when things were good, but by what they reached for when they thought no one was watching. She said it better than that. She always said things better than me, but that was the idea. I watched Gavin for 2 years before I said anything to Alicia. 2 years of family dinners and holiday visits and weekend trips, and I watched him the way you watch someone you're not sure about. I watched where his eyes went when he walked into a room. I watched how he talked about money, not the amounts, but the attitude, the hunger underneath the calm, the way he'd ask questions about things that weren't really his business, and then smile like he was just making conversation. He asked about my pension once, then about my property, then about my investment accounts, framed as curiosity, framed as just wanting to learn from someone with experience. I answered vaguely. I've been answering vaguely my whole life when it comes to money. My father taught me that. He said, "Son, the people who need to know what you have already know. Everyone else is just taking inventory." I never forgot that. Here's what Gavin didn't know about me. I retired at 62 from a 30-year career with the city of Philadelphia. Utilities management. Not glamorous, but steady. Benefits. A pension that actually pays out. I also owned 2 rental properties in West Philadelphia that I'd been holding since the 90s, when everyone else was selling and I was buying. The neighborhood changed. The values went up. I also had a brokerage account that I'd been quietly contributing to since my late 30s, mostly index funds. Nothing exciting, just patience. I'm 67 now. What I have is enough, more than enough. But I don't talk about it, and I don't display it, and I live in the same house I've lived in for 22 years, on a quiet street in Chestnut Hill with a modest car in the driveway and a garden in the back that I tend myself. To look at me, you'd think I was comfortable, but not wealthy. That is intentional. About 14 months before Alicia called me that Tuesday in Savannah, I sat down with my attorney, a woman named Helen, who has handled my affairs for nearly 2 decades and who I trust completely. We restructured everything. The house went into a revocable living trust. The rental properties went into an LLC. The brokerage account had already had a beneficiary designation that was just Alicia, but we reviewed and updated it. Everything was documented, organized, protected. I didn't do this because I'm paranoid. I did it because I'd watched Gavin for 2 years by then, and I'd started to understand what he was actually looking for. 3 months before they got engaged, I told Alicia I had concerns. We were sitting in my kitchen. It was a Sunday afternoon in November, cold outside, and I'd made her mother's sweet potato pie recipe, which is the only thing I make really well. I was direct with her. I told her I'd noticed things about Gavin, the questions about money, the way he sometimes seemed to be calculating something behind his eyes, the inconsistency in his work history that he glossed over when I asked follow-up questions. She got quiet. Not angry, quiet, which with Alicia is actually worse because it means she's really listening but she doesn't want to be. Then she said, "Dad, you've never fully trusted anyone I brought home." That wasn't entirely untrue, but it also wasn't the point. I told her I wasn't saying don't love him. I was saying be careful. I was saying protect yourself. I told her that her mother and I had a prenuptial agreement when we got married, not because we didn't trust each other, but because we were adults who understood that love and financial planning are two separate conversations, and one doesn't dishonor the other. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "Will you at least come to dinner next week and try harder?" I said I would. I did. Gavin was charming at dinner. He always was. They got engaged in the spring. The wedding was that September in Baltimore, outdoor venue. About 120 guests, very beautiful. Gloria would have cried. I cried a little myself, though not where anyone could see me. I paid for the wedding. I want to say that clearly because it matters to what comes later. I paid for it because Alicia is my daughter, and I wanted her to have the day she wanted. I did not pay for it because Gavin asked me to, though he did hint at it, twice, in ways that were just indirect enough that he could claim he was only joking. He wasn't joking. I know that now. I knew it then too. After the wedding, they settled into an apartment in Northern Liberties. Nice neighborhood, newer building, decent location. Gavin had told Alicia he had enough saved for the security deposit and first few months. That turned out to be loosely true in the way that a lot of things Gavin said were loosely true, technically accurate, but missing important context. Within 4 months of the wedding, Alicia quietly told me that money was tighter than she'd expected. Within 6 months, Gavin had suggested, twice, that they should look into buying a house. The second time he suggested it, he mentioned that it would be easier if they had help with a down payment. And then, not long after that, he started asking Alicia about the house in Chestnut Hill. My house. My house where I raised her. Where her mother died in the back bedroom with her hand in mine, and the window open because she always liked the air. Where I've kept Gloria's garden going for 11 years because I don't know how to stop. My house, which is paid off, which sits on a corner lot, which is worth considerably more than it was when I bought it, and which Gavin had apparently decided represented an opportunity. He didn't come to me directly. That I'll grant him. He was never stupid enough to come to me directly. He worked through Alicia. Little comments. Little suggestions. Your dad's in that big house all by himself. Has your dad ever thought about downsizing? A lot of people your dad's age put their property into the family. Alicia told me about these conversations. Not all of them, and not right away, but eventually. She'd started to feel something uncomfortable, though she couldn't quite name yet. The way you feel a draft before you know which window is open. I listened. I didn't say much. I just listened and filed it away. And then about 8 months after the wedding, Gavin asked Alicia if she knew whether the house was in my name or in a trust. She came to me that same evening. We sat in the kitchen again, same table. She asked me straight out, "Dad, is the house in your name?" I told her the truth. The house is in a trust, baby. Has been for a while. She got quiet again. Then she said, "Why did he want to know that?" I said, "That's a very good question. I want to be fair to my daughter here. She is not naive. She is not weak. She is a woman who is in love, and love has its own logic that doesn't always respond to outside information, and I understood that. I wasn't trying to blow up her marriage. I was trying to make sure my house, my wife's garden, my retirement security, and my daughter's future were protected regardless of how things turned out. Because by that point, I had a feeling about how things might turn out. I had a very specific feeling. Gavin's next move surprised me a little because it was bolder than I expected. He started asking Alicia about a storage unit. I have a storage unit in a facility about 12 minutes from my house in Mount Airy. I've had it for 8 years. I use it for documents I don't want in the house, some of Gloria's belongings that I wasn't ready to donate but couldn't keep looking at every day, and some other items that I'd rather not have lying around in plain sight. I don't know how Gavin found out about it. Maybe Alicia mentioned it in passing years ago. Maybe he'd seen me come and go from it once. Maybe he just assumed a man my age who owned property would have storage somewhere. However he found out, he'd clearly decided that whatever was in there might be significant. He asked Alicia about it casually, the way he asked about everything. Just wondering. Just curious. Does your dad keep financial documents in there, do you think? Old deeds, that kind of thing. Alicia told me about this on a Sunday. On Monday morning, I called Helen. Helen said what I expected her to say. Nothing in that unit affects the trust documents. The deeds are properly recorded. The LLC paperwork is filed. There's nothing in that storage unit that changes your legal position. I said, I know that, but I want to go through it anyway. She said, why? I said, because I want to know what someone would find if they got in there, and I want to make some changes. Helen was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Samuel, what are you thinking? I told her. She was quiet again. Then she said, you thought about this. I said, for about 8 months. What was actually in that storage unit before I went through it? Some of Gloria's winter coats that I hadn't been able to give away. A box of Alicia's childhood art projects, crayon drawings, school photographs, a handmade Mother's Day card from 1998 that made me stop for about 5 minutes when I found it. Old tax returns going back to 1987, a box of tools I'd meant to donate. 2 lamps, a filing cabinet with rental property records. None of it was particularly sensitive. Some of it was. I spent a Saturday going through everything. I took the financial documents home and shredded what needed shredding and organized the rest into a locked filing box that I kept at the house. I updated the storage unit so that what remained was primarily personal items. Gloria's coats, the childhood keepsakes, family photos in a plastic bin. And one other thing. I wrote a letter. It took me 3 drafts and most of an evening. I wrote it by hand, which I almost never do anymore, because I wanted it to feel like what it was, a father writing to his daughter with his full attention and no shortcuts. I wrote about her mother, about what Gloria saw in people, and how rarely she was wrong, about the year Alicia was born and how we drove to the hospital in a snowstorm in January, and Gloria was completely calm the whole way, while I nearly drove us off the Schuylkill Expressway. About the things I hoped for. Alicia, not money, not property, not any of the things that can be inventoried and appraised. About the things that couldn't. I put the letter in an envelope. I wrote her name on it. I put it inside the bin with the family photos underneath the pictures of her 5th birthday party and her high school graduation and her wedding day. Then I locked the unit and went home. I was in Savannah when my daughter called. Dad, one word, that wait. She told me that Gavin had been to the storage facility, that he'd gone without telling her. She'd found out because the facility sent an access notification to her phone since she was listed as an emergency contact on my account. He hadn't been able to get in. The unit requires a personal keypad code that only I have, and he didn't know it. But he'd been there. He'd asked the facility staff questions. He'd walked around the outside of the unit. She wasn't whispering because she didn't want Gavin to hear her. She was whispering because she was trying not to cry. Dad, she said, I don't know what he was looking for, but I know it wasn't good. I was quiet for a moment. I said, "Alicia, I need you to listen to me." She said, "Okay." I said, "I need you to come to Philadelphia. Not this weekend, today. Can you do that?" A pause. "Yes," she said. She drove up that afternoon. I drove back from Savannah the next morning, which is about 10 hours, and I made it in 9, because I had something to get home to. We met at the house. I made coffee, we sat at the kitchen table, and I told her everything. Not the version where I softened it to protect her feelings, the full version. The questions about the pension, the property comments, the timing of the storage unit visit relative to the questions about the deed, the conversation I'd had with Helen 14 months ago, the restructuring I'd done, and why. I watched her face while I talked. I'd known that face for 34 years. I know every version of it. And what I saw wasn't surprise exactly. It was recognition. Like someone finally saying out loud the name of something she'd been aware of in the dark for a long time. When I finished, she sat quietly for a while. Then she said, "He was never asking about your retirement because he admired how you'd managed it." "No," I said. "He wasn't." "He was calculating," she said. "Yes." She looked at her hands on the table. "Did Mum ever?" "Your mother would have seen it inside of a month," I said. "She always did." Alicia smiled at that a little. Then she said, "What's in the storage unit, Dad?" He kept asking me like there was something specific. I stood up. "Get your coat. I'll show you." We drove to Mount Airy together. I unlocked the unit, rolled up the door, and turned on the overhead light. She looked around at the coats, the labeled bins, the neatly organized shelves, and I could see on her face the slight deflation of someone who had been bracing for drama and found instead just a tidy room of ordinary things. I reached into the bin with the family photos. I handed her the envelope with her name on it. She looked at it for a long moment, at her name in my handwriting. She opened it there in the storage unit, under the fluorescent light, with the door open and the cold March air coming in, and she read it without saying anything. She was crying by the second paragraph. I let her read it twice. When she looked up, she said, "You've been carrying all of this." I said, "That's what parents do." She folded the letter back along its creases and held it against her chest for a moment like she was deciding something. Then she said, "I'm going to talk to a lawyer." I said, "Helen is very good. I can introduce you. I want to be careful about what I say next, because my daughter's marriage is her business, and the decisions she makes from here are hers to make. What I can tell you is that she did talk to Helen. What I can tell you is that she asked some questions and got some answers and made some decisions that I supported completely. What I can tell you is that Gavin is no longer asking questions about my property or my storage unit or my pension, because Gavin is no longer in a position to ask my daughter anything at all. And I want to say something about that, about endings that don't feel like the endings you wanted. Because Alicia didn't want this. She had loved him genuinely, in the way that you love someone when you've decided they're the person you're building your life with. That kind of love doesn't just switch off when you find out the truth. It bleeds out slowly, and it hurts the whole time, and there's nothing a father can do to make that part easier. What I could do was be at the kitchen table with her. What I could do was keep the coffee on. What I could do was tell her the truth long before it became a crisis, so that when the crisis came, she had ground to stand on. The storage unit is mostly the same as it was. I kept the coats. I kept the childhood drawings and the 1998 Mother's Day card. I kept the family photographs. Alicia kept the letter. She told me she reads it sometimes when she needs to remember what actually matters, which is not money or property or anything that can be put in a trust or filed with the county clerk. She is doing well, better than I expected, honestly, and I expected a lot from her because her mother raised her that way. A few weeks after everything was resolved, she came to the house on a Sunday afternoon. I made the sweet potato pie. We sat in the kitchen and watched the light change through the window over the sink. And she told me about a trip she was thinking of taking to Portugal, and I told her about a new bird I'd seen in the garden that I couldn't quite identify, and it was just an ordinary Sunday, which is the most valuable thing I know how to offer her. Her mother would have loved that afternoon. I hold that thought like I hold most things that matter, quietly and very close. I think about that Tuesday morning a lot. The mockingbirds at my sister's feeder, the coffee going cold on the railing, the way one word from my daughter, just Dad, carried the weight of everything she hadn't been able to say for months. What I've come to understand is that nothing that happened was accidental, not the good parts and not the hard ones. Gavin didn't stumble into our lives and stumble back out. He made choices, one after another, each one small enough to explain away, but each one pointing in the same direction. And I made choices too. The difference was that mine were made out of love and his were made out of calculation, and those two things cannot occupy the same life forever without one of them eventually giving way. I'm not a man who believes the universe keeps score in any mystical sense, but I do believe that the way you treat people, especially people who trust you, has a way of circling back. Not always quickly, not always in the way you'd expect, but it circles. Gavin spent 2 years treating my daughter's family like a resource to be accessed, and what he found in the end was a door he couldn't open, a family he couldn't crack, and a woman who finally understood what she'd been living with. That's not luck, that's consequence. What I wish I could tell younger fathers, younger parents of any kind, is that protecting your children doesn't stop when they turn 18 or when they get married, or when they seem fine. It changes shape. When Alicia was small, I protected her from scraped knees and bad neighborhoods. When she was grown, I protected her by being honest with her, even when it cost me her comfort. By setting up legal structures she didn't know she needed, by writing a letter I hoped she'd never have to read, but made sure was there if she did. That's what I mean when I say protection changes shape. The work is quieter when they're adults, but it's no less necessary. And here's the thing about doing that kind of work over years. In the background, without being seen, it requires you to trust yourself, to know what you know even when the person you love is telling you that you're wrong, that you're too suspicious, that you should try harder. I sat across from my daughter in that kitchen and told her the truth about Gavin when she didn't want to hear it, and then I sat with the discomfort of having said it and not been believed, and I kept doing what I knew was right anyway. That's not easy. Staying steady when someone you love is asking you to look the other way. That takes something. It takes the kind of strength that doesn't announce itself, the kind that just keeps showing up. Gloria taught me that. She never made a performance of her own strength. She just never stopped. Alicia has that in her too. I saw it the day she drove up from Philadelphia with her jaw set and her eyes clear, ready to hear things that were going to hurt, ready to act on them. That took more courage than anything I did. What I carry from all of this is simple. The things that actually matter. The letter in the storage unit, the Sunday afternoon sweet potato pie, the ordinary hours with the people you love. Those things can't be taken. They can't be found with bolt cutters or legal filings or clever questions. They live in the years you put in, the truth you told when it was hard, the presence you kept when it would have been easier to be somewhere else. That's the only inheritance worth leaving.